Today, we're looking at Noodler's Gruene Cactus. Hi, I'm Adam, and I'm an ink guy. I get inks, test them, and share the results with you. Now, Noodler's Gruene Cactus is a green ink, and to make sure I have a range of experience with this ink, I do the writing samples. I put the ink into a different pen for a day. I then put it into a D-like alpha with a medium nib to take my notes for this video. Now, before we get to the writing samples, let's look at the sciencey bits. Up first is a chromatography, and I agree with Vita that I've learned a lot by doing multiple chromatographies. The one on the left is done the way it's supposed to be done. I put a line of ink down, immediately dunk it into water for 10 to 15 seconds. And we see this really light minty green across the bottom. And then it mixes a little darker and a much darker green across the top, which is a very nice mixing of greens to get this very unique tone. Now the one on the right I let dry for 10 minutes before I dunk it in the water. And that minty green across the bottom becomes a much more defined line. It's the part that makes you feel like it's going to stay around a little bit. It does the same mint push up, a light green and a very dark green across the top. But we see some hints of blues coming through at the very top. If you look just across that top line, you see 2 or 3 spots where a kind of blue is coming through, and that looks neat. Resistance tests are done to see how this ink can be expected to perform on the page, and more importantly, how hard it might be to clean from your pens. I let the smear dry for 3 days before testing it. Looking at the highlighter, it seems to handle it perfectly fine. There is some spreading that goes on. There is a little bit of blurriness that occurs, but this is not a waterproof ink, and that looks like it would be completely readable if I had to highlight it from my notes. Water reactivates and lifts all the darker tones, but leaves that minty green behind. There's still quite a bit of green left. I don't feel like water's enough to get this out of your pen. Now, pen flesh does everything water does. A bit more of it comes up, and that kind of green or blue that we saw a little bit of in the chromatographies actually looks more like a purple when we see what the pen flesh did to it. So that's where we're getting some of the great shading that occurs with this ink in this whole swab, this great range of color in the smear. I think pen flesh is what you're going to need to get this out of your pen, but I do feel that there's the chance of needing something a little bit more aggressive. So if you did need a 1/3 bleach solution, you see that it completely obliterates it from the page. And if you used it, get it in quickly, out quickly, and then start rinsing the pen. Don't let the bleach sit there. For the inks I've tested, I found an average viscosity of 2.5, with a realm of normal being from 2.1 to 2.9. Noodler's Gruene Cactus has a viscosity of 1.3, making it a wet ink. To find my average dry times, I use the extra fine and medium nibs on my writing samples done on Clairefontaine, Tomoe River, and Rhodia paper. For the inks I've tested, I've found an average dry time of 17 seconds, with a realm of normal being from 13 to 21 seconds. Noodler's Gruene Cactus has an average dry time of 12 seconds, so while it's a faster drying ink, it's not a fast dry ink, but it's certainly faster than normal. Now, let's look at the writing samples. I picked this ink up in sample form, and to keep my writing samples consistent, I use a Jinhao 159 with a Goulet 1.1 stub, a Jinhao X450 with a Goulet medium, and a Jinhao X750 with a Goulet extra fine. Let's take a look at Clairefontaine. We have no bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen. It does offer, me knocking the papers, well off, it does offer some nice shading throughout the writing, but because it's down darker, the shading is only a shade or two darker. It doesn't show up as much, but it's definitely there. Just not as much. The extra fine, a lighter tone of green, no feather, spread, halo, sheen. Beautiful shading throughout this writing. It is truly nice to look at. 8 seconds to dry. Just look at what happens with quick, with over. Nice. Medium, same tone that we got with the extra fine. I like when inks do that. I also like when they have entirely different tones. Sort of just like a lot of what inks do. All right, whatever, The medium, no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, beautiful shading throughout. It really shows off. It really, truly shows off when we get to the medium. The amount of shading difference that's going on in quick in medium versus the quick in extra fine, tremendous. The amount of shading difference between brown and brown, it shades like a different ink. It's gorgeous. It's really nice. It's gorgeous. 11 seconds to dry for medium. Now the scrubby of the extra fine and the medium don't show a lot of color variation. The medium shows a little. The extra fine not so much, but we do get shading up in the writing samples. So while it doesn't show as much here, way more, doesn't show any, shows ton, smear test says you could likely recover it. Tomoe River, no bleeding. Yes, we have ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather, spread, halo, sheen, or shade on this paper. It gives you no shading. The extra fine is a lighter tone, only a little bit lighter. No feather, spread, halo, sheen, little bits of shading. It's got the hint here that it's able to shade, and that's it. It's like, oh yeah, you know, I could sort of do that sometimes. The K is a little darker, the X is a little darker, the PS is a little darker, the 8's a little darker than the dog or seconds. It's there, just not a lot. 8 seconds to dry. Medium, darker tone, no feather, spread, halo, sheen, no shade. 25 seconds to dry. The scrubby of the extra fine shows a lot of color variation. We don't get a lot. The medium shows none. We didn't get any. The smear test, you can't recover it. So Rhodia. Rhodia gives us no bleeding, no ghosting. That's not bleed. That's me being sloppy. The 1.1 gives no feather, spread, halo, sheen, but it does offer us some shading and some really nice shading, very gradual shading. Right into the E, into the D, L, out into the ER, back into darker on the S. Nice. Extra fine, same tone that we got with the 1.1. No feather, spread, halo, sheen. We do get some very nice shading throughout here. Very gradual shading and not huge amounts of shading. It just goes like 2 tones darker, but not as much shading, but it is there. 5 seconds to dry. Noticeably darker tone than the rest with the medium. No feather, spread, halo, sheen, no shade. 15 seconds to dry. The scrubby of the extra fine shows us some color variation. We got some color variation. The scrubby of the medium showed us none. We didn't get any. I don't know that you actually could recover it. I know it looks much more on the smear of the extra fine, but where it's smeared, I can't see it at all. Where it stayed, I can. So there's your coin toss. What happens if I put this on yellow Rhodia? Well, we get no bleeding and no ghosting, which is what we expected. But did we alter our tones? We did. We lightened it up with the 1.1. We lightened it up with the extra fine, and we got darker on the medium. How unusual. 1.1 is no feather, spread, halo, sheen. It does offer us some nice shading. Now the extra fine has no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen. The shading is much more noticeable here than it was with the white paper. Way more noticeable. Those darkers look much darker, and those lighters look much lighter. Quick really shows it. Over very much shows it. Dog very much shows it. 5 seconds to dry. The medium, noticeably darker tone. No feather, spread, halo, sheen, absolutely no shading here. 16 seconds to dry. The scrubby of the extra fine shows very little color variation. We got much more in the writing. Scrubby of the medium shows us none. We didn't get any. Smear test, same thing. If you didn't actually smear it, it's there. If you did, it's gone. Fabriano Echo Qua. Very nice paper to use. No bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 is no feather, spread, halo, sheen, or shade. Noticeably different tone with the extra fine, with no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, no shading. 3 seconds to dry. The medium has no feather, spread, halo, sheen, or shade. It's a noticeably darker tone. It gives very nice tone differences when we're dealing with different nibs. And with the right nib and paper, it does shade beautifully. That's why, you know, I tend to think of this as a good shading ink because of what it does with different nibs and with the right nib and paper. 7 seconds to dry for the medium. Scrubby for the extra fine and the medium don't show us a lot of color variation, although the extra fine shows us a little more. We didn't have it. The smear test, I think you could recover this. So I like composition notebooks, cheap paper, cheap notebooks that tend to work very well. Now we didn't totally bleed through, but we definitely seeped deep into the page. Yes, we're going to have show through, especially you put that paper on the back. It's super thin paper, but like this, it doesn't look like it. There is some show through. It's super thin. It wouldn't stop me from using the other side of the page. That's a medium up top. It has feathering, which I haven't had a lot of on the composition notebooks. The Mead composition notebooks have done very well for me, and this one feathered. It didn't spread. It didn't halo. It showed some shading. The N starts darker, gets lighter. At the D, it starts getting darker into the L and even darker into the ERS. Very nice. Green starts dark, gets light at the point up top, gets dark again coming down. So it does show some nice shading with the 1.1, but the feathering is a problem, or the medium. The feathering's a problem for me. So the extra fine had no feather, spread, halo, sheen, and no shade. It only took 1 second to dry. The scrubby showed us no color variation. We didn't get any. And the smear test, I actually think you could recover it if you did smear it, which is nice when you're dealing with a lab notebook. That's all that I have for the writing sample. Instead of finding inks that look like Noodler's Gruene Cactus, I would prefer to find an ink that complements its color on the page. I've chosen Diamine Scarlet because that is a great bright red to go with this amazing green. Before I give my opinion on this ink, I would ask, if you've enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up. And if it's your first time here, I would invite you to subscribe. Now, what do I think of Noodler's Gruene Cactus? We did see some blues or purples in the chromatography, and they came through in the resistance test a little bit. But what I love is this is a great green that comes down as a pure green. We see none of those other tones, but we see great shading, great performance all the way through. I like green inks and how well they perform. Their shading is amazing. Being someone that likes shading in ink, I tend to lean towards some greens, some purples and browns. This one is definitely on my short list of a bottle I would like to have. Thanks for watching.